Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I recently had a good interaction with a couple of young college-age kids who were fishing on my local river recently. I ran into them on the water. We kind of talked for a little bit and we asked how things were going. And they told me that they were struggling. So we talked about what they were doing and they were throwing crankbaits. Specifically, they were throwing a crankbait, a wigglewort, an old wigglewort, as well as a DT10. And both of them great crankbaits. I own tons and tons of them, but they had expressed to me that they weren't having many bites at all. And we, started talking about what was going on and the fact that a lot of the smallmouth here on the river, which is what they were targeting, are starting to finish up with the spawn, and therefore they may not be out as deep as that, as they were fishing with those other deeper running crankbaits. But more specifically, one of the things I pointed out to him was that they probably should try going with a small crankbait. And when we talked about small crankbaits, what I told them was the smaller the better. And in fact, not just necessarily like going from a DT10 to a DT6, but if you've got any small crankbaits, like crappie size crankbaits, you might want to give it a try. Because one thing I've recognized over the years, especially with smallmouth, but also with bass and spotted bass, is that once the fish finish up with the spawn, a lot of times your smallest baits can be the most productive. I've done videos in the past about using little 1/8 ounce buzz baits and tiny little spinner baits, things like that. The same holds true for your crankbaits. So I want to go over some of my favorite post-spawn crankbaits. So not necessarily the crankbaits we're talking about when bass get out way out on the shell beds where they're chasing gizzard shads. In those cases, you're generally better off throwing bigger crankbaits. But in this case, I want to talk about those fish that are going to stay closer to the bank. A lot of places that don't necessarily have shad, like up here in the North Country, where the fish start feeding in on really small pin minnows or shiner type minnows. We're talking little 1-inch fry type fish. And a lot of times the best way to match that hatch is to go with a really small crankbait. It's something I've seen happen years and years and years. And in the case with the college kids, I actually got a direct message from one of them after the fact, a couple of days later, just saying, "Hey, thanks. We switched to a couple of really small crankbaits and we caught a bunch more fish." So I can tell you it's not just me that is seeing success in doing this, but I want to walk you through a couple of these crankbaits just because I think it might point you in the right direction and show you how small I'm actually talking about. One of my favorites right off the top is a little Shad Rap. This is a little size 5 Shad Rap. This is really a great little bait. And one other thing I want to point out with this, it's funny to me how in the bass world we'd look at something like this as a small crankbait, but yet in the walleye world where we're catching much larger size fish on average, this is like the normal size that guys are trolling and casting for walleye. So don't think that this is by any means too small for a bass, because it's not. But a little size 5 Shad Rap by Rapala is a great one to use. This is one of my all-time favorite crankbaits, to be honest with you. I have used that since I was a kid, all the way up into my tournament years, and it's a wonderful, wonderful bait. Another one, guys, you saw me actually do a video. Some of you did. If you watched my channel for a while, I actually made this custom crankbait right here. This is a Bomber Square A, and you might notice that lip on there is actually my toenail from the toenail video that I did, where I used my toenail to replace the lip and then took this out on the river and caught a bunch of fish. That was actually a video that I did roughly about the same time of year. I ended up catching a pile of fish on the toenail crankbait. If you want to watch that, I'll tag that at the end of this video, even though I know it makes a lot of you guys pretty sick, but it still catches fish. But this little Bomber Square A, absolute killer, killer little tiny crankbait. I mean, it's just a little midget of one, but it works phenomenally well. Another one that's one of my favorites, but yet one of the most popular, I feel like, on the professional level, if you're talking small crankbaits, is a little Berkeley Fritzside 5. This is the junior size, so it's actually smaller. This is the clicking one, which I happen to really like on the river here because it gives off a lot of sound, a lot of extra vibration. But this little crankbait is an absolute murderer. as well, and this is one we've seen a lot of guys like John Cox throw at the Bassmaster Classic, and a lot of other guys do really well on a little Fritz side 5, but that's a great little one. Another one that's been discontinued, but this is one of my all-time favorite crankbaits. It's a little Rapala Rattlin wrap size 4. So this is a tiny little crank, but man, this is one of my all-time favorite smallmouth crushers. And then last but not least, this is another one. I'm not even sure if this is made, but this is the little Megabass Baby Griffon. Another tiny little absolute smasher of a crankbait. So all of these work great. I'll put links to these if they're even on Tackle Warehouse. A lot of times it's difficult to find these little crankbaits because they're not traditional bass tackle gear. But if they are at Tackle Warehouse, I'll put a link up so you guys can go check those out. But I do want to point a couple of things out with these when fishing them. Because you're talking about a crankbait that's so light and has small little hooks, I personally like to fish these on spinning gear. Generally speaking, I'll throw it on anywhere from 6 to 10 pound fluorocarbon line. I generally prefer to go straight fluorocarbon, and a lot of that has to do with the hook size. Because you're talking about such small hooks, I feel like the braided line a lot of times will pull the hooks out of their mouth, meaning, you know, you basically with a little hooks like this generally have them more skin hooked, and the more stretch in that fight allows you to land a lot more fish. You end up you do lose a lot of fish on these small hooks. So you can upsize the hook, but keep in mind you upsize the hook, you're probably going to overpower a lot of these little baits. So you want to be careful with the baits, the hooks that you change out. Now, I will say if you do it properly, you can get these little baits, which tend to run only a few feet deep, a little bit deeper. You'll actually end up sinking some of them, but in some instances, it will work. So you want to be careful with what hooks you change out. But when you do hook up with a fish, you want to play them out. You want to have your drag set either real loose or free spool them if you're using on a bait caster. The point here is you let the fish basically tire themselves out versus horsing them to the boat with these little hooks, because they are all generally smaller hooks. You know, even on the shad wrap, this is a good example. On this little Rattlin wrap size 4, I actually replaced the standard hooks with some of these VMC outbarb treble hooks, which are ones that I like, but these are bigger hooks than what comes stock on it. So the bait does get a little bit deeper, and it does not float nearly as fast as it would generally with the stock hooks that came on this, if you can find these. Like I said, this has been discontinued. I wish they'd bring it back because it's a little killer of a bait. But, you know, a couple of things. When fishing them, I like to use them on straight fluorocarbon line. If not monofilament, I like to throw them on spinning gear, a long spinning rod preferably. I like to throw them generally on like a 7.5 1 power, so it's a medium light action rod. And then I'm basically just covering a lot of water. You can burn these things pretty good. You can deflect them off a lot of different cover. Does not necessarily have to be just rock. You can actually fish these higher up in the water column too, depending on what it is that you're fishing. But I will say a lot of these baits work well off the bottom. So if you're fishing some clear water, maybe some flats and 4 to 8 feet of water, a lot of these baits only run down to 4 feet. So you can burn them across that clear water and get the fish to come up and commit to them, because they are such little snacks for those fish. But do not think that when you see a little baby griffin like this, that these are made for crappie or, you know, other species, because the bass will eat them up. The post-spawn period is one of the best times to do it. That transition from summer to fall is another time when it's absolutely phenomenal. Like right where you're at almost the hottest period of the summer, and the temps are just starting to drop off, but haven't really cooled off a lot. You've got a ton of those little pin minnows and little minnows that the bass are keying in on, that these baits do a really good job at triggering those fish. So they work year round, but those are the 2 times I really like to use them. And right now, if you happen to live in my area, like on the river here, they're catching a lot of fish. So guys, I hope it helps. If you haven't tried some tiny crankbaits, I really recommend you at least have 1 or 2 of them to give a try, because I think you'll find not only do they catch a lot of fish, they're actually a lot of fun to use because they are so little. It's like a finesse crankbait approach. So thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, new video coming out tomorrow.